She served tea to a silent stranger for 30 days. She fainted when the king bowed to him. The king's velvet robes dragged through the mud as he stepped into the Black Horse Inn, and for the first time in 30 days, the mystery began to unravel. But let us return to the beginning, to the night when everything changed. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrubbed the blood from the floorboards. 19 years old, orphaned at 7, she had known nothing but cruelty within these rotting walls. The Black Horse Inn was her prison, and Mrs. Higgins was her warden. "You worthless wretch!" Mrs. Higgins's screech cut through the tavern like a blade. The older woman's jowls shook with rage as she bore down on Sarah, her meaty hand raised to strike. 3 tea leaves. 3. Do you think I'm running a charity? Sarah flinched, tasting blood from where she'd bitten her lip during the last beating. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the gentleman asked. "The gentleman can drink water." Another slap. Sarah's cheek burned. That night, the storm arrived with biblical fury. Rain hammered the roof like 1,000 drums. Thunder shook the windows, and then the door crashed open. He stood in the doorway like death incarnate. A hooded figure, massive and dripping, his cloak black as sin. Lightning flashed behind him, illuminating nothing of his face but the gleam of dangerous eyes. Mrs. Higgins grabbed the poker from the fireplace. "Out! We don't serve vagrants." A gold coin spun through the air, landing with a heavy clink on the counter. Then another, and another. The stranger's voice was barely a whisper, rough as gravel. "Room 4. Mrs. Higgins's greed wrestled with her fear. "Greed 1. She snatched up the coins, her smile grotesque. "Room 4 it is, good sir." "Sarah, take the gentleman upstairs." Sarah looked at the stranger. Water pooled at his feet, mixing with something darker. Her stomach twisted with dread. She had no idea that serving tea to this silent man would cost her everything she'd ever known, and give her everything she'd ever dreamed. Oh, astonishing, isn't it? But before we reveal how this incredible moment came to be, I have a question for you. Do you believe that destiny is written in the stars, or do we make it ourselves? Let me know in the comments below, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? I love reading you stories. Now, settle in, hit that subscribe button to join our family, and let me tell you the truth about what really happened. If he kills anyone, Mrs. Higgins hissed, shoving the tea tray into Sarah's arms, let it be the orphan. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she climbed the creaking stairs. The old wood groaned under her feet, each step an eternity. Room 4 waited at the end of the hallway, its door slightly ajar, darkness spilling out like an invitation to doom. She knocked softly. No answer. Sir? I've brought tea." Silence. Then, from within, enter. The room was suffocating in its darkness. Sarah's eyes struggled to adjust. The single candle she carried seemed pathless against the shadows. Then she saw him, a mountainous silhouette seated by the window, perfectly still, watching the storm. "I'll just leave this here, sir." Her voice cracked. She set the tray on the small table, her hands shaking so badly the cup rattled against the saucer. The sound seemed deafening. She turned to flee. Drip, drip, drip. Sarah froze. In the candlelight, she saw it. Dark droplets falling from his sleeve onto the wooden floor. Not water. Blood. Fresh blood. She should run. Scream. Alert Mrs. Higgins. But as she looked up at the stranger's profile, she saw something that stopped her cold. Pain. Deep, bone-weary pain etched into every line of his posture. He wasn't a monster. He was a man. A wounded man. "You're hurt," she whispered. "Leave." His voice was steel wrapped in silk. Sarah didn't leave. Instead, she did something that defied all logic and self-preservation. She reached down and tore a strip from her already tattered apron. The sound of ripping fabric seemed to startle him more than her words. "What are you doing? You're bleeding." She stepped closer, her fear transforming into something else. Purpose. May I? For a long moment he didn't move. Then, slowly, he extended his arm. Sarah's fingers worked quickly, binding the wound with the makeshift bandage. His arm was corded with muscle and crisscrossed with old scars, the arms of a warrior. When she tied off the cloth, he flinched, but his eyes never left her face. "Why?" he asked. Sarah met his gaze for the first time. In the candlelight, his eyes were neither cruel nor kind. They were hollow, haunted. "Because someone should," she said simply. "We all deserve that much." She left before he could respond, her heart pounding for entirely different reasons now. Behind her, in the darkness of room 4, the stranger touched the bandage with something like wonder. He had forgotten what mercy felt like. Dawn became Sarah's secret hour. While Mrs. Higgins snored in her rooms and the other servants slept, Sarah would climb the stairs with tea, bread, and clean bandages. Room 4 became her sanctuary. The only place where she wasn't invisible, wasn't worthless. For 2 weeks he remained silent. She would enter, change his bandages. The wound was deep, likely from a sword. Leave the tea and depart. He never spoke, never moved, just watched her with those haunted eyes. On the 15th day, everything changed. "Arthur." Sarah nearly dropped the tray. It was the first word he'd spoken since that first night. "I'm sorry, sir." "My name. It's Arthur." His voice was rough from disuse, like rusted iron scraping stone. "You've been caring for a stranger for 2 weeks. You should know what to call him." A smile tugged at Sarah's lips, the first genuine smile in months. "I'm Sarah." "I know." I hear her screaming it. His jaw tightened. "Why do you stay?" The question hung in the air. Sarah sat down on the edge of the chair, something she'd never dared before. "Where would I go? I have nothing. No family. No money. No future." She looked at her scarred hands. "At least here I have a purpose, even if it's just surviving." Arthur leaned forward, and she saw his face clearly for the first time. Hard angles, a strong jaw rough with beard, eyes like storm clouds. But it was the sadness in those eyes that caught her breath. "You deserve more than survival," he said quietly. "So do you," she replied. "Yet here you are, hiding in the dark." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. They stared at each other, two broken souls finding unexpected kinship. The next morning, Sarah found a gold coin on the empty tea tray. And the morning after that. And the morning after that. 30 gold coins in 30 days, each one placed deliberately where Mrs. Higgins wouldn't see them. A secret between the two of them. "You don't have to," Sarah protested on the 23rd day. "I do," Arthur interrupted. "You're the only person in 3 years who's looked at me and seen a human being instead of a weapon or a threat." He paused. "The gold isn't payment, Sarah. It's gratitude." On the 30th day, as Sarah poured his tea with practiced ease, Arthur smiled for the first time. It transformed his entire face, cracking through the armor of pain and isolation. "Best tea in England," he murmured. Sarah laughed, a sound so foreign to her own ears that it startled them both. Neither of them knew that their fragile peace was about to shatter. Mrs. Higgins's scream could wake the dead. "Thief!" or "devil's spawn." Sarah jerked awake as rough hands dragged her from her straw mattress. Her head cracked against the floor, stars exploding behind her eyes. Through the haze of pain, she saw Mrs. Higgins standing over her, face purple with rage, clutching Sarah's hidden gold coins. "How dare you!" The first blow caught Sarah across the face, splitting her lip. "Stealing from my guest. Or did you earn these on your back, you filthy?" The second blow never landed. A presence filled the doorway, dark, enormous, radiating cold fury. Arthur stood at the threshold of Sarah's tiny servant's quarters, and though he didn't raise his voice, the air itself seemed to freeze. Step away from her. For words, spoken softly, yet Mrs. Higgins stumbled backward as if physically pushed. "Yes, sir. I was just... This girl, she stole." "She stole nothing." Arthur descended the stairs with slow, deliberate steps. Each footfall echoed like a judge's gavel. "Those coins were mine to give." Mrs. Higgins's fear transformed into indignation. "Then you've been defiling my servant. Under my roof. I'll have the authorities." Arthur stopped 3 steps from the bottom. He didn't need to descend further. His presence alone commanded the room. When he looked at Mrs. Higgins, Sarah saw something terrifying in his eyes. Not anger, but the absolute certainty of someone who had ended lives and lost no sleep over it. "You will do nothing." His voice could cut glass. "That girl has shown me more humanity in 30 days than most people show in a lifetime. While you..." He reached into his coat and pulled out a velvet bag. It landed at Mrs. Higgins's feet with a heavy thunk. "You are a parasite who feeds on the broken." Mrs. Higgins snatched up the bag, her greed overcoming her terror. Her eyes widened at the weight of gold inside. "This covers Sarah's wages for the next 10 years, Arthur continued, his gaze never leaving the innkeeper's face. "Consider her debt paid. And know this." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled every corner of the room. "Touch her again, and you'll lose more than your hand." Mrs. Higgins fled. Arthur turned to Sarah, who was still on the floor, bleeding, clutching her face. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw his armor crack. He knelt beside her, his large hand gentle as he tilted her chin to examine the damage. "I should have intervened sooner," he said, his voice rough with regret. Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Not from pain, but from the overwhelming shock of being defended, protected, valued. "You didn't have to." "Yes," Arthur said firmly. "I did." He helped her to her feet, and Sarah realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer stranger and servant. They were something else, something dangerous in its intimacy. Upstairs, neither of them noticed Mrs. Higgins watching from her window, her face twisted with venomous rage. The gold was heavy in her hands, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. She wanted revenge. The wanted poster was weather-beaten and mud-splattered, but Mrs. Higgins could still make out the sketch. Her blood ran cold, then hot with vindictive glee. Wanted for treason against the crown. Dangerous fugitive. Reward, 1,000 gold sovereigns. The face on the poster was partially obscured by a hood, but the height, the build, the description, it matched. It matched perfectly. Her guest. Her Arthur. A traitor to the king. Mrs. Higgins's hands trembled. Not with fear, but with barely contained excitement. 1,000 sovereigns. More wealth than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. Enough to buy a proper inn in London. Enough to live like nobility. And that little wretch Sarah would finally learn what happened to orphans who thought themselves better than their station. The sheriff's office smelled of tobacco and old leather. Sheriff Blackwood looked up from his desk, his weathered face bored until Mrs. Higgins leaned in close and whispered 6 words. "I know where the traitor is." His boredom evaporated. "The Black Horse Inn," she continued, her voice dripping with false patriotism. "Room 4. He's been hiding there for a month. I suspected, of course, but I needed to be certain before bringing such serious accusations." Lies flowed from her mouth like poison. She painted herself as a loyal subject, a vigilant citizen, a hero. The sheriff listened, his eyes growing harder with each word. "We'll come tonight," he said. "After dark. Tell no one, not even your servants." Mrs. Higgins nodded eagerly. "Of course, Sheriff. For king and country." She returned to the inn as twilight descended, her smile so wide it hurt her face. Sarah was in the kitchen, preparing the evening's tea service. Of course she was, the devoted little fool. "Sarah, dear," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice sickly sweet. "Make something special for our guest tonight. Extra comfortable. He won't be with us much longer." Sarah looked up, confused by the sudden kindness. "Is he leaving, ma'am?" "Oh, yes," Mrs. Higgins hummed, already imagining her gold. "He's most certainly leaving. Make it a night he'll never forget." As Sarah climbed the stairs with the tea tray, Mrs. Higgins settled into her chair by the fire, counting her future fortune in her mind. Outside, the sun set blood-red on the horizon. In a few hours, armed men would surround her inn. In a few hours, the traitor would be in chains. In a few hours, she would be rich beyond her wildest dreams. And Sarah, dear, stupid, compassionate Sarah, would learn that mercy was a luxury only fools could afford. Mrs. Higgins poured herself a generous glass of brandy and waited for the darkness to fall. The sound of horses' hooves on dirt. Sarah froze in the kitchen, a dish halfway to the wash basin. It was late, past midnight, too late for travelers. She moved to the window and peered through the grimy glass. Her blood turned to ice. Shadows moved in the darkness. Men on horseback, at least a dozen, surrounding the inn like wolves circling prey. Moonlight glinted off steel swords, rifles, and there, at the front, she recognized the sheriff's distinctive black stallion. Behind her, Mrs. Higgins's door was closed, but Sarah could hear her humming, while armed men surrounded the building. Understanding crashed over Sarah like a freezing wave. The false kindness, the special tea. "He won't be with us much longer." "No," Sarah whispered. "No, no, no." She didn't think, didn't plan. She simply ran. Up the stairs, her feet barely touching the steps. Down the hallway, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She crashed through the door of room 4 without knocking. Arthur was at the window, already dressed, already alert. He'd heard them too. "Arthur," Sarah gasped, grabbing his arm. "They're here. The sheriff, at least 12 men. Mrs. Higgins must have. You have to run. Please, there's a back way through the cellar." "Sarah." His voice was calm. Too calm. "Stop. We don't have time. They'll kill you." "The poster. I've seen the wanted posters in town. Treason. They'll hang you." "Sarah." Firmer now. He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Breathe." She tried. Failed. Her whole body was shaking. Arthur moved with deliberate slowness, pulling on his heavy coat. He checked something inside it. Sarah caught a glimpse of a sealed envelope, wax stamp gleaming. He reached into his pack and withdrew a folded piece of parchment, sealed with deep blue wax bearing an ornate crest she'd never seen before. "If I die tonight," he said, pressing the letter into her trembling hands, "you take this directly to the king, not his guards, not his advisors, the king himself. Do you understand?" "Arthur, what?" "Promise me, Sarah." The shouts outside were getting louder, closer. The sheriff was organizing his men. "I promise, but—" Arthur cupped her face with one large hand, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. For a moment he looked like he might say something more. Instead, he simply held her gaze with an intensity that stole her breath. "I'm tired of running," he said quietly. "For 30 days you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Peace, dignity, humanity." His jaw tightened. "Let them come. I won't hide anymore. They'll kill you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it's time for the truth to come out." The front door exploded inward with a tremendous crash. Mrs. Higgins's triumphant cackle echoed up the stairs, followed by the sheriff's booming voice. "In the name of the king, come out with your hands raised." Arthur straightened to his full, imposing height. He walked to the door of room 4, opened it wide, and descended the stairs like a king approaching his throne, not a fugitive approaching his execution. Sarah clutched the sealed letter to her chest and felt her world beginning to end. The sheriff kicked the door to room 4 off its hinges. Mrs. Higgins stood in the tavern below, her face flushed with vindictive joy, pointing up the stairs like a prophet proclaiming judgment. That's him. That's the traitor. I've had him trapped here for weeks, gathering evidence. Silence, woman. The sheriff's voice was hard. He drew his sword as his men fanned out, surrounding Arthur at the top of the stairs. Arthur stood perfectly still, his hands visible, his expression unreadable. He looked like a man waiting for a storm he'd known was coming. "You are under arrest for crimes against the crown," the sheriff announced. "High treason, conspiracy, and—" The ground shook. At first Sarah thought it was thunder. But the sound was wrong, rhythmic, thunderous, the pounding of hundreds of hooves. The windows rattled. Dust fell from the ceiling beams. Then came the trumpets. Clear, bright, unmistakable. The royal fanfare that every English citizen knew from childhood. The sound that announced the presence of royalty. The sheriff's face went white. "That's impossible. The king is in London. He couldn't possibly." The front door, already hanging from one hinge, was blown completely apart. What entered was not men, but a force of nature. Royal guards in gleaming armor, their white and gold tabards immaculate even in the muddy chaos of the inn. They moved with military precision, forming 2 lines that stretched from the door to the base of the stairs. Behind them came the generals, 5 of England's most decorated military commanders, their chests heavy with medals, their faces grim and purposeful. And then, through the doorway, stepped a figure that made every person in the room, sheriff, guards, and Mrs. Higgins, dropped to their knees as if their strings had been cut. The King of England. He was younger than Sarah had imagined, perhaps 40, with a commanding presence that filled the cramped inn like water filling a glass. His velvet robes were spattered with mud from hard riding, his crown slightly askew, but his authority was absolute. Mrs. Higgins's triumphant expression crumbled into confusion. "Your Majesty, I captured him for you. The traitor. I." The king's gaze swept over her as if she were a piece of furniture, noting her presence and immediately dismissing her as irrelevant. His eyes moved up the stairs, locking onto Arthur. Every person in the room held their breath. The king began to climb. His guards moved to follow, but he raised one hand, stopping them. Step by step, he ascended, his eyes never leaving Arthur's face. When he reached the top landing, the 2 men stood face to face, the King of England and the wanted fugitive. The silence was so complete that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Then the King of England did something that shattered reality itself. He knelt. One knee touched the filthy floorboards of the Black Horse Inn, and the King of England bowed his head before the man the sheriff had come to arrest. "Brother," the king said, his voice carrying clearly through the shocked silence. "The war is over. The usurper is dead. The throne is secure." He looked up, and Sarah saw tears on the face of England's monarch. "You're safe now. Come home." Mrs. Higgins made a sound like a dying animal. "Brother?" "But the poster traitor." One of the generals turned to her with cold contempt. "That traitor is Prince William, second in line to the throne. He's been in hiding for 6 months, protecting the royal succession while we rooted out the conspiracy. His eyes could have frozen fire. And you, madam, attempted to have him arrested." The blood drained from Mrs. Higgins's face so quickly Sarah thought she might faint. Sarah's hands went numb. The sealed letter fell from her fingers, landing on the floor with barely a whisper. Prince William. Not Arthur. Prince William. The man she'd bandaged. The man she'd served tea. The man who'd given her gold coins and defended her honor and looked at her like she mattered. Prince. The tea tray slipped from Sarah's other hand. It fell in slow motion, the porcelain shattering like her understanding of reality. Tea spraying across the floor in an arc that caught the candlelight like liquid amber. The last thing Sarah saw before darkness claimed her was Prince William's face turning toward her, his eyes wide with concern, his hand reaching out. Then nothing. Sarah woke to softness. Not the scratchy straw of her mattress. Not the cold, hard floor of her quarters. Velvet. She was lying on velvet, softer than anything she'd ever touched in her entire life. Her eyes fluttered open. The ceiling above her was carved wood, painted with gold leaf that caught the morning light streaming through. Were those glass windows? Clean glass windows? Easy. A familiar voice, rough and gentle. "You've been out for nearly an hour." Sarah turned her head. Prince William. She still couldn't think of him as anything but Arthur. Sat beside her, perched on the edge of what appeared to be an ornate couch. His hand was holding hers. A prince was holding her hand. "I fainted," she said, her voice hoarse. Dramatically. The corner of his mouth corked up. The tea tray shattered quite spectacularly. "My brother was impressed." "Your brother?" "The king." Sarah tried to sit up. The room spun. William, Arthur, the prince, steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. "Slowly," he murmured. They were in the inn's best room, a space Mrs. Higgins rented only to the wealthiest travelers. Royal guards stood at attention by the door. Through the window, Sarah could see the royal carriage, gleaming black and gold, surrounded by dozens of mounted soldiers. "Mrs. Higgins," Sarah said suddenly. "Where?" "Being dealt with." William's expression hardened. "Though I'd very much like your input on that." As if summoned by her name, the door opened. Two guards dragged Mrs. Higgins in, now wearing iron shackles. Her face was blotchy with tears, her fine dress torn. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in an hour. Behind her walked the king, ducking slightly to clear the doorframe. He looked at Sarah with curious, kind eyes. The family resemblance was striking now that she knew to look for it. "Miss Sarah," the king said, his voice formal but warm. "My brother tells me you saved his life, multiple times, while being brutalized by your employer." His gaze shifted to Mrs. Higgins, and frost entered his tone. "We need to discuss appropriate consequences." Mrs. Higgins dropped to her knees, her chains rattling. "Mercy! Your Majesty! I didn't know. How could I know? Please, I'm a loyal subject. I've always—" "You beat a teenage girl," the king interrupted quietly. "Regularly. Violently. My brother showed me the scars." Sarah's face burned. She'd never wanted anyone to see. "You starved her while living off her labor," the king continued. "And when she showed kindness to a wounded man, you tried to have him executed for profit." His expression could have carved stone. "The treason charge might not apply to you, but a dozen others certainly do." Mrs. Higgins turned to Sarah, her face desperate, all traces of cruelty replaced by pathetic pleading. "Sarah, please, tell them I wasn't always cruel. Tell them we had an understanding, didn't we? I gave you a roof, food. You gave her scraps and beatings," William said coldly. "I was there. I heard every scream, every insult, every blow." His hand tightened on Sarah's. "The only reason I didn't intervene sooner was because I thought my presence endangered her more. I was wrong." The king looked at Sarah directly. "She is yours to judge, Miss Sarah. My brother's life debt extends to me. What punishment fits her crimes?" The room went silent. Every eye turned to Sarah, the orphan girl who'd spent her whole life being invisible, powerless, worthless. Now the King of England himself waited on her words. Mrs. Higgins's eyes were wide with terror and something else, the dawning realization that the worm had turned. Sarah looked at the woman who'd tormented her for 12 years. She thought about all the beatings, the starvation, the endless degradation. She thought about the satisfaction she could feel watching Mrs. Higgins hang, or rot in a cell, or be exiled to somewhere terrible. And she thought about 30 mornings, climbing stairs with tea and bandages, choosing mercy over fear. Let her serve, Sarah said quietly. In the royal prisons. Let her bring tea to the prisoners every morning. Let her scrub floors. Let her know what it feels like to be the servant instead of the master. She met Mrs. Higgins's eyes. Let her learn what she never taught me, that every person, no matter how low, deserves basic human dignity. Mrs. Higgins sagged in her chains, and Sarah couldn't tell if it was relief or despair. The king nodded slowly, a small smile playing at his lips. A wise and measured judgment. It shall be done. He gestured to the guards. Take her. 10 years in the royal prison. Hard labor. She serves the servants. As they dragged Mrs. Higgins away, she looked back at Sarah one final time. There was no more cruelty in her eyes, only defeat and perhaps, buried deep, the first glimmer of understanding. When the door closed, William squeezed Sarah's hand. Thank you, he said softly. For what? For being better than all of us. The royal carriage waited in the yard like a golden dream. Morning sun glinted off its polished sides, and the matched white horses stamped impatiently, their breath misting in the cool air. Half the village had gathered to stare, kept at a respectful distance by stern-faced guards. Sarah stood in the doorway of the Black Horse Inn, no longer her prison, but not yet her past. She wore a clean dress, provided by the king's staff, that actually fit her properly. Felt strange. Everything felt strange. Prince William descended the steps and stopped before her, his hand extended. In the daylight, without the shadow of secrecy, he looked different. Not softer exactly, but more complete. A puzzle whose missing pieces had finally been found. Come with me, he said simply. Not a command. An invitation. Your Majesty, Sarah started, the formal title still foreign on her tongue. William, he corrected gently. To you I'll always be William. Or Arthur, if you prefer. A shadow of a smile. I've grown rather fond of the alias. Sarah looked at his extended hand. Behind him, the king stood by the carriage, watching with patient interest. Generals and guards, lords and ladies. A whole world of power and privilege waiting. I don't belong in that world, Sarah whispered. William stepped closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I didn't belong in yours either. You took me in anyway. His eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had watched her from the darkness of room 4, were steady and sure. I need someone at the palace I can trust absolutely. Someone who sees me as a person, not a title. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me the truth. His hand remained extended. I need you, Sarah. What would I do? I'm just... You're the woman who chose mercy when she had every right to choose vengeance. You're the person who saw a bleeding stranger and offered help instead of horror. You're... He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face. You're my friend, perhaps the only real friend I've ever had. The king called out from the carriage, amusement in his voice. William, we do have a kingdom to run. Coming. William called back, never taking his eyes off Sarah. What do you say? Will you trust me the way I trusted you? Sarah looked at the inn one last time. 12 years of pain and servitude, of invisibility and worthlessness. Then she looked at William, at the man who defended her, valued her, seen her. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid, and Sarah felt something she'd never experienced before. Certainty. Not about what lay ahead, that was terrifying and unknown, but certainty that she was making the right choice. I'll need tea, she said. Lots of tea. I don't suppose the palace has a decent kettle? William laughed. A genuine, bright sound that transformed his entire face. We'll get you the finest kettle in England. He helped her into the carriage. The interior was more luxurious than anything Sarah had imagined. Velvet seats, cushioned footrests, gold fixtures. She sat stiffly, afraid to touch anything. The king settled across from them, his shrewd eyes moving between Sarah and his brother with knowing amusement. "So, William tells me you make exceptional tea." I suppose I do, Your Majesty. Please call me Edward." He smiled. "Any woman who saves my brother's life and shows more wisdom than half my council has earned that right." The carriage lurched into motion. Sarah watched through the window as the black horse grew smaller, then disappeared around a bend in the road. "No looking back now," William murmured. Sarah turned to face forward, toward London, toward the palace, toward a future she couldn't possibly imagine. "No," she agreed. "Only forward." The royal palace gardens were in full bloom, roses and lavender perfuming the air with a sweetness Sarah had never known existed during her years at the inn. She walked the stone paths with a confidence that had taken months to build, her silk dress rustling softly with each step. "Miss Sarah! Miss Sarah!" A young page came running, his face flushed with excitement. "His Highness requests your presence in the blue drawing room. He says, and I quote, 'Tell her to bring the good tea leaves, not the swill the kitchen staff has been trying to pass off as breakfast blend.'" Sarah laughed. "Tell His Highness that I'll bring whatever tea I please, and he'll drink it with gratitude." The page's eyes widened in delighted scandal. Then he dashed off to relay the message. A year. It had been a year since she'd climbed into that golden carriage, terrified and uncertain. A year since her life had transformed from nightmare to dream. The first months had been overwhelming. Learning palace protocol, navigating the labyrinth of courtly politics, enduring the whispers. The orphan girl, they called her. The servant Prince William rescued, some with admiration, others with contempt. But William had been patient. He'd introduced her to each duty slowly, starting with small responsibilities and building her confidence. Head of the royal household had seemed like an impossible title at first. Managing the palace staff, overseeing state dinners, maintaining the private royal residences. But Sarah discovered she had a gift for it. Years of anticipating Mrs. Higgins's needs to avoid beatings had taught her to read people, to understand what was needed before being asked. More than that, she treated the palace staff with the dignity she'd been denied. Word spread quickly. Lady Sarah was strict but fair, demanding but kind. The servants adored her. The nobility grudgingly respected her. And William. Sarah entered the blue drawing room and found him at the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the gardens. He'd been restless lately, she'd noticed. The peace following the rebellion's end had brought political stability but personal uncertainty. "You're brooding again," Sarah said, setting down the tea service. William turned, that familiar almost smile quirking his lips. "I'm contemplating. That's what brooding people call it." She poured 2 cups with practiced ease. "What's troubling you?" He accepted the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. "My brother thinks I should marry." Sarah's hand stilled for just a moment before she poured her own cup. "I see. Does he have someone in mind?" "Several someones. Princesses, duchesses, ladies of impeccable lineage." William took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers. "None of them have ever bound a wound with strips from their apron." Sarah's heart stuttered. "William, none of them have ever risked their lives to warn me of danger. None of them have ever looked at me and seen just me." He set down his cup and crossed to where she stood. "In the darkest moment of my life, when I was bleeding and broken and ready to give up, a girl with nothing gave me everything." "I only gave you tea," Sarah whispered. "You gave me hope." William reached up, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You gave me mercy when I deserved suspicion. You gave me dignity when I had none. You gave me a reason to stop running and start living again." "I'm not a princess," Sarah said, her voice catching. "I'm an orphan, a servant. I have no title, no lands, no. You have my heart." The words were simple, devastating. "You've had it since the night you chose kindness over fear." I was just too much of a coward to tell you. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. The court will never accept it. They already barely tolerate me. Then they'll learn. William cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. I've spent my whole life doing what was expected of me, playing the perfect prince, following every rule. His forehead touched hers. I'm done running from the only thing that's ever felt real. Are you certain? Sarah breathed. I've never been more certain of anything. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. Sarah, will you marry me? Will you be my partner, my confidant, my equal? Will you let me spend the rest of my life being worthy of the mercy you showed me? Sarah's answer came not in words but in action. She stood on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling through tears. I'll take that as a yes, William murmured. Yes, Sarah confirmed. 1,000 times yes. The door burst open. King Edward stood in the doorway, trying and failing to look surprised. Oh good, he finally asked. I was beginning to think I'd have to issue a royal decree. He grinned at their shocked expressions. What? You think I didn't notice my brother has been utterly besotted for months? Even the kitchen staff were taking bets. William groaned. Edward. She said yes, I presume? The king looked delighted. Excellent. We'll announce the engagement at the state dinner next week. The nobility will clutch their pearls, the people will love it, and anyone who objects can take it up with me personally. His expression turned serious. Sarah, you saved my brother. You've earned your place in this family through courage and character. Let anyone dare say otherwise. 6 months later, the coronation had been magnificent. Sarah, now officially Princess Sarah, had walked down the abbey aisle in a gown of ivory and gold, her hand steady in William's, while the kingdom watched, some with joy, some with skepticism, all with fascination. Now, in the quiet morning of their private chambers, the spectacle felt distant. Sarah sat in the window seat of their apartment, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. William emerged from the bedroom, hair disheveled, wearing a simple shirt and trousers. He looked more like the wounded stranger from Room 4 than the Prince of England. Tea? Sarah asked, gesturing to the service she'd prepared. William crossed to her, settling beside her on the window seat. She poured, the familiar ritual grounding them both in something real and true. He took a sip, his eyes closing in contentment. Best tea in the kingdom. Sarah laughed softly. You always say that. It's always true. He opened his eyes, looking at her with such open adoration that it still took her breath away. Do you ever think about it? That night in the inn. Every day, Sarah admitted. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. That I'm here. That you're. She gestured helplessly at the palace around them, at the life they'd built. That I'm yours. William finished. Believe it, because I am. Completely. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping tea as the sun rose over London. 1.5 years ago, Sarah had been invisible, broken, convinced she had no value beyond survival. Now she was a princess, not because of blood or title, but because she'd chosen kindness when cruelty would have been easier. Your Highness. A servant knocked softly at the door. The council meeting begins in an hour. We'll be there, Sarah called back, her voice steady with the authority she'd grown into. As they prepared for the day ahead, royal duties, political negotiations, the endless work of running a kingdom, William paused at the door. He looked back at Sarah, and for a moment, she saw the wounded man from Room 4, the one who'd been lost until someone offered him tea and mercy. Thank you, he said quietly, for not running that night, for staying, for everything. Sarah crossed to him, straightening his collar with wifely efficiency. You saved me too, you know. The moment you defended me, you showed me I was worth defending. You always were. I know that now. She smiled. We saved each other. They walked together through the palace corridors, hand in hand. A prince and an orphan who'd found each other in the darkest of places and built something extraordinary from tea and kindness. The end. She saved a prince with a cup of tea, and he gave her a kingdom in return. But more than that, they gave each other something far more precious. They gave each other home. Dear viewer, what part of this journey touched your heart or surprised you today? If you'd enjoy more historical love stories filled with healing and hope, let me know below. Please like, subscribe, and share to help others find these stories too. Thank you for spending your precious time here. Your next beautiful story is waiting on the screen.